Was That My Fault? Written and read by Gerry Ezard. Billy Bowles, trawler skipper and coxswain, peered through the window of the crew house in the Guernsey lifeboat station. The rain slashed across the harbour and rattled the windows. "How many of ours out?" he asked. "I counted 6 of ours and a Frenchie, all due back on the next tide," answered Gray, a tall beanpole of a man in dripping yellow oilies. "Any yachties?" queried Billy. "2 due in same time," said Gray, adding, "out of Falmouth." Bill Bowles dropped his huge frame onto a stool, and reaching for his fid, began methodically splicing 2 lengths of rope together. As his hands braided the thick strands, he glanced round at the other crew members, all engaged in the eternal maintenance of their lady. She was the powerful Trent lifeboat, gleaming with the love of 20 pairs of hands, snugly poised on her launching rope. "Do you remember that Moonraker, power cruiser she was, out of Falmouth on passage here?" he asked, glancing round at his crew. "Something about Pollock Rock, wasn't it?" asked Splashy. He was the designated crew member who wore a wetsuit and who plunged into the boiling surf to rescue swimmers, surfboarders, and stray dogs with the quiet abandon of a reckless hero. It was that, mates," Bill said. "We was fishing that day in my old boat, the Lazy Swan, trawling in the shallows. Bit of local knowledge helps, don't it?" And they all nodded agreement. His mates, all West Country fishermen and garners of all things marine, had migrated to Guernsey and naturally became the lifeboat crew. Bill continued. "This pleasure cruiser out of Falmouth was on passage here. She could manage about 12 or 15 knots, strongly built, and 2 150s. And they nodded. 2 150 diesels would do quite nicely. Anyway, as they reached halfway, about 45 miles out, the weather turned and she began to blow from the southwest. Nothing too fancy, but a good force 5. You know," he added with a grin, "a yachty's gale." The crew smiled. Yachtsmen would often report a gale as anything over force 4, but a full gale was force 8. Bill said, "Well, she was still making good time, but the skipper's wife got took sick, and as she went below, the electrics gave up. All the navigation equipment went on the blink. No lights, so he was on dead reckoning, using his charts and compass as the good Lord intended." And he shook his grizzled head. "It was a nasty wind, slashing the tops off the waves with blinding spray and a long swell, with the promise of worse to come. We was drenched in the old Swan, so he must have been underwater most of the time. It was too late to turn back, and a divert to Cherbourg, his only option, was an even longer leg," Bill advised. "Mind you, without lights as well, there was quite a danger of collision, because the mackerel were running, and there was about 40 boats round about." Bill examined his work. The 2 lengths of rope, now joined, had become a line. Rope, bought at the chandlery, becomes lines, painters, sheets, halyards, warps, and other terms designed to confuse the landlubber. Well, now he was on dead reckoning navigation and making a fair fist of it. He was setting a bit too far to the east on account of the leeway. When he was bouncing round in the cockpit with no lights and the spray blinded him, I don't reckon he could see farther than the end of his bow. But when he entered the shallows where he was fishing, he missed the Guernsey light completely. I turned on my floodlights to all in the trawl, and he steered towards him." Bill paused, remembering the fierce decklights, the shouted commands above the noise of the surf, and the racket of the winch as the great trawl nets were hauled in. Moments later, his electric sparked up, and sighting the lighthouse off to his starboard, he swung towards it. He scratched his bristles. And you can all guess what happened next. "She got her then?" asked Gray. "Aye," said Bill. "She got her, spitted right through her, like a skewered haddock. So we went over in the Lady and took the crew into harbour." "The Pollock Rock," mused Splashy. "A few sticks of dynamite would do for her." "Won't be much good," replied Bill. "There's 30 foot of tide there, so when the tide went out, that moonraker was stuck 20 foot in the air for all to see." Bill chuckled. "Well, Fliggy from the Guernsey Post came out and took about 40 photos of her, and he sent them round to all the newspapers, and it was picked up all over the world. The owner, nice chap, bought us all a drink. Weren't worried too much about the boat, he was insured and all. And they refloated her next tide. But we found out later that every port he entered, he had a crowd of people laughing and pointing. He couldn't even sell her, so he changed her name." "Unlucky that is to change her name," murmured Gray darkly. "Aye, it is unlucky," agreed Billy as he carefully coiled the splice warp. "But you know, lads, I often wonder, was that wreck my fault?